Sorry. I'm still doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome today to the Melbourne Marine Insurance Forum presentation for April. Today, we're lucky enough to have John Cupid presenting for us. John has more than 10 years experience in the industry, and today John is presenting a project cargo case study on an operation he was involved in the world's largest underwater restaurant in the Maldives. If you could please put your hands together and welcome John.
You're taller than me. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I hope everyone had a good Easter break. Not too many of us were working. I certainly wasn't. And this project was interesting. It was about a year ago now, so I'm sure you'll find it entertaining, I hope. Now I'll just work out. Got it. So, good morning. So, the world's largest underwater restaurant in the Maldives. And I've broken it. Oh, there we go. Teething problems, I'll get there. So, firstly, I'll provide an introduction into what we're talking about. I'll talk a little bit about Project Cargo, how we go about being a marine warranty surveyor and what's entailed in that. Pre-planning risk mitigation really is what we do, so it's very, very important. So I'll give you some insights into that. The handling, shipment method handling and stow of the cargo. This wasn't overly big, but it was very important for reasons I'll allude to shortly. And it was interesting and high value as well. New Plymouth is where we load it, over in New Zealand. It has its own risk factors there that I'll talk about as well. The route planning was very, very important because it was cyclone season last year, so we needed to avoid any bad weather. Discharge, of course, in the Maldives was important. It was especially important for me to get there a couple of days early and made sure that I understood a little bit about the Maldives and how clear the water was. Didn't really have a lot of time for that, but I did have a little time. Discharge operations, I'll talk about that and I'll conclude. And we have a good video to finish it off to keep you awake right at the end. So it's a surveyor's perspective. That's what I've been for a little over 10 years, probably a bit over 30 years. But it's really, from my perspective, GAC were the forwarders, are the project forwarders, and they have a different perspective. If we get time, we can play their video as well, which is quite a good one. They put together for marketing purposes. New Zealand do some good things. I don't like to admit that if there's too many Kiwis around, but they are very, very good at engineering. And they actually designed this and manufactured it in New Zealand. It is the world's largest underwater restaurant. There is another one at another resort in the Maldives, and this one was bigger and better, heavier, all that sort of thing. I have been contacted about another project that they're getting up, which is quite secret at the moment. It'll actually be bigger, but it won't be a restaurant. It'll actually be a underwater, they have them in Dubai as well, it'll be an underwater residence, and they're building it in Singapore. So I've had some contact about that. So this will still remain the world's largest underwater restaurant, because the other one won't be a restaurant. Champollion is the company that we work for. They were the ultimate client. Huge company. I learned about it when I was there. Basically owned by two brothers, Swedish guys. Interesting people. Got to know them quite well. And this was their baby. They're building a brand new resort island. They have, give you an example of the size, the seaplane that I flew from Mali up to the island was owned by them. They own all the seaplanes, about 46 of them. They own the biggest limousine company in Dubai. They're headquartered in Dubai. They have their own private island in Stockholm. So yeah, they've done very well. And interesting thing about Lars, who's the guy that is the main shareholder of Champollion, is he told me, I asked him one night over dinner, how did he come about getting into resort islands? And he said, well, he was in the travel game and he was working for a UK company, and they'd sent him down to the Maldives back in the 70s to find out if there's any opportunities. So he found the island and he said it's up for sale. Well, you buy a long-term lease, you never actually fully own it, but you might buy a long-term lease. So he presented the case to them. Back in those days, it was faxes and telephones. So he presented the information to them, the business case. And they said, thank you very much. We'll have a think about it. He rang them again the next day and the next day after that. And they ended up saying, look, we're already committed fairly heavily around the world. We're not going to take up this opportunity. So he said, I'll do it myself. So he quit his job. He raised the capital and he bought the island. And it's a true story. And it's just hugely successful. And they run it like a cruise ship, basically, because you've got a lot of people, 2,000, 3,000 people on an island, and it's the same as a cruise ship, having a bunch of people, a couple of thousand people on a cruise ship, a captive audience where you need them to buy food and drink and go scuba diving and boat trips, those sorts of things. So he employs most of the people out of the cruise industry, which, again, I thought was interesting. Anyway, I digress. Mike Murphy is the fellow that designed it, 30 years designing big aquariums, underwater restaurants, underwater tunnels. Good guy, Mike. He's very entertaining for a New Zealander, but he also has a good sense of humour. So we got the job done, but we also had a bit of fun. Fitzroy Engineering built it. They do a lot of offshore work, so they work for the platforms and out in the oil and gas industry. So Adrian oversaw the project. Again, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge about engineering. So he helped us to overcome some little problems we came across here and there. Innovative engineering, I'll talk to you about that. 10 months to build. Some of the things they did were quite unique. 420 tonne, so it's not overly heavy. I've been involved in 1,200 tonne items, a lot heavier and bigger, but this one had its own unique characteristics, if you like. For example, it was very fragile. 18 metres long, 5.5 metres wide, and nearly 13 metres high. That was mainly the stairwell. So that's the spiral staircase at the end that you'll see soon. The kitchen's up top, and you just go down there and basically eat with the fishies. So it was just, the acrylic that they got, the acrylic sheets were imported from Japan, and they were very expensive as well, and technical in what they had to order. 24 people. You can do your honeymoon there if you want, Jeremy. You can always pop over there. You can have special occasions. You can have wedding reception, whatever you like. Had to charter a heavy lift vessel, of course. GAC won the awarded the project. He did a lot of design work. Jumbo Shipping, the MV Fairlane, fantastic ship. Good crew, good captain. So we're very fortunate in having Thor and the ship. Otherwise, it mightn't have gone so well. The reason the Fairlane was chosen, again, not overly high capacity cranes. I mean, you get a lot bigger cranes than that, but just the right size cranes, but very important to have it at the starboard side of the vessel because of where we had to discharge. You couldn't have the cranes on the port side. A lot of heavy lift vessels have the cranes on the port side. So that was a very important criteria. Direct voyage to minimise the risk. There was talk in the earlier stage of the project to call in and get some more cargo. That was all, argued about, and we suggested that wasn't necessary. And Champlain's paid more for it to be a direct voyage. They have a lot of money, so they weren't too worried. They'd rather just get it there in a hurry. So that made the risk management easier, taking it directly there. Discharge straight into the water, which was a bit strange, putting something in the water. We try and keep things out of the water normally, but this time we had to put it in the water. 5.8 metres underwater, and the piles had already been put in there. And we're instructed for the, originally for the load survey, and then they forced me to go and do the discharge survey, threatened me with no more work if I didn't go, so I had to go. That's the first look at the restaurant. Doesn't look much. That's in the Fitzroy Engineering facility, getting finished off, putting up the high lashings off the stairwell and those sorts of things. So a bit of an ugly looking thing and cumbersome, but that's what we saw. Now, just to give you a bit of an idea, project cargo, what we tend to do is hang out at horrible places, middle of the night, ports that aren't very pleasant often, Port Pirie, Gladstone, up at Mackay, Townsville. So there's some of the assignments that we generally get involved in. Industrial, noisy, hot. Being at Port Perry in the middle of summer isn't pleasant. I try and delegate that to others. And often weekend work, night work, that sort of thing. So that's what we're used to doing as surveyors. That's our job. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of the sorts of project cargo work that we do around the place. Of course, I think it's interesting, but I'm biased. I love the work. You need to be trained, you need to be experienced, and you have to communicate. It's all about communicating apart from the technical side of things. You have a lot of people involved. So you always have other surveyors, you have a port captain, pilots in some cases, the vessel, shipping company, the chief officer, the master, the crew, all those people. Underwriters are involved, P&I clubs, tug captains. So really it's communication to me is a key, as it is for all surveying, particularly important in this particular one. And in other unique project cargo assignments, I think communication is one of the biggest criteria. If you can't communicate, you can't do the job, and negotiate and discuss and change plans. Critical cargo, usually we talk about high value. The other criteria is weight and dimension, centre of gravity being off centre. DSU, delayed startup, is always a criteria. So it's about replacing it. So when it takes 10 to 12 months to make it, plus your lead time to design it and then get it there, you're talking about a year and a half. So if it gets damaged, it's another year and a half, even if you fast track, you get another one. That would kind of ruin their plans at the resort island. So met all those criteria hands down. Location and risk. As you'll see shortly, the location it was going to, even where we loaded was quite risky, but the location it was going to was quite risky. There were quite a few risks there that we had to deal with. So again, some project cargo shots just to give you an idea of loading and different cargoes. Rail carriages, steel, break bulk cargo, wind farms sometimes, or stacker reclaimer parts. We're involved in the Adani project soon, I believe, so that'll be more stacker reclaimers. I had one of our guys in Brisbane down early this morning to do a discharge of some critical cargo. So that's the sort of thing. See the sunrise or see the sunset. Sometimes up in Solomon Islands or other interesting places we go. They've got their own challenges as well. Just getting people to wear hard hats and safety boots is a challenge. And that's a splitter. So that's the sort of thing, rail cars. We've got more of those stacker reclaimers coming in, transformers, of course, which we had a lot of in the Queensland Power Station days. So yeah, just to give you some idea of the project cargo work, that's the semi-submersible yacht Brisbane every now and then. That's very interesting as well. And rail carriages, rail cars, a bunch of those coming into if the government gets it right. So yeah, just some background photos down at Coffs Harbour at W. Smith Hudson. We have done a lot of work there with refinery equipment, big vessels that they make there, and they have to put on barges. Challenging, and we get out on site to do heavy lifts and tailing in heavy loads and those sorts of things. So that gives you an idea of what we normally do for project cargo, and this is what I was unfortunate enough to experience for my project cargo job. So it was pleasant, and the weather was good, and I got to know some of the wildlife, see how clear the water was. Where we had to position the underwater restaurant, you had to make sure the visibility was good, so it's important to go down with the divers and have a look, and of course have a beer with them afterwards and discuss the matter. So all those things are very important. And that was one of the offices there out on the hammock. That was where you could spend some time just thinking through the project. So it wasn't so bad, but there were some good sides and the bad. So the guys that owned it looked after us very well, but we still had to get the job done. So the locations were good. That's what it looked like once it was in the water. Give you some idea. So what we were doing was that part there. So that's the restaurant that we're worried about on the pylons, and they built the rest on top, which is all done now. It's all open. So that's the kitchen and the entry on the island. So preparation. So we had to do lift studies, as you do. So I've got some of those, but I won't bore you with a lot of technical detail unless somebody wants me to. But we studied, part of my role is to review all the technical data, which I did. Asked a lot of questions, had some telephone conference calls, had revised diagrams made where I raised some issues. And everyone worked as a team. So we all had our input. Weather conditions, they told me they chose that time of year because the weather was perfect. It was almost perfect, but you know, we had to look at that very carefully because the vessel is on a charter with a LACAM. So if you get it there and it's got to sit around for 2 or 3 weeks, it gets very expensive. We looked at wind speed and swell conditions. That was all documented. All the risks were clearly identified by me and put out to all parties, including underwriters. The long period swell at Port Taranaki, I'd researched and I'd been told about before, so we had to deal with that. And that's where you have a long period swell means it comes in with long periods between the swell. And it's actually where it comes at Port Taranaki, where it's facing Australia, but south, so it's facing southwest, is where the swell comes in. So I was a little bit concerned about that because that would actually upset the load operation. And it's quite a risk at Port Taranaki. Turned out, New Plymouth, the same thing. Turned out it wasn't there though that particular time, so we're okay. Where it was going, remote location, right alongside coral reefs, mooring arrangement, which we'd been through. Yeah, a lot of risks there. A lot of risks that were identified. We had to look at the underwater side of it, the buoyancy. Once you put it in the water, it can't float anymore. You've got to get it down under the water. So Mike Murphy had a naval architect involved, which did some calculations on the buoyancy, or how to get the lack of buoyancy so it could go down underwater. So that was all documented as well. All the parties, we talked to them, made sure everyone was happy or as happy as they could be. All the documentation was obtained and we went through all that. On deck or under deck stow, the first thing I said is under deck, safer. Anyway, any surveyor would say that. Ended up being changed on deck, which originally I objected to, but then we looked at it carefully. It really didn't bother the vessel. It wasn't very heavy. The vessel was light ship anyway. We just ballasted her up. End of the day, it wasn't there to put it quicker to put it on off the ship. You didn't have to open pontoons and go down under deck. Easier to stow it, secure it. So end of the day, when we thought about it, it was actually better. So we put it on deck. And of course, you do all the sea fastening calculations, and then I made them even more secure just to make sure it didn't fall off. So some schematics and diagrams to show what it looks like. Doesn't look very attractive there, but it looks attractive once it's set up. The center of gravity wasn't too bad. The lift was quite straightforward once you had everything rigged up correctly. And the fragility was there if it got knocked about, then there was going to be some problems. So we had to talk to everyone about that. That's where it was going to. Our island is up in the north part of the Maldives. So you've got Mali, which is the main place where you fly in and out of, which is overcrowded and not overly pleasant. Then you get on a seaplane, you head north, and it's up in the top there. The largest resort, and there's the mooring arrangement and some of the schematics that we went through where to put it. They were still building this island. Their budget was 50 million US, and they'd almost blown the budget by the time I got there last year. So I'm sure they spent a lot more. But it's a 6-star resort. So needless to say, they didn't invite me for the grand opening for some reason. I think it got lost in the mail. But anyway, it's a nice resort island. That's where we're going to position the vessel, if you can make sense of that. And it goes down in the water there. We've got a walkway leading out to it there. So nice coral reef. What they actually did is they took all the coral away before the vessel came. They had marine biologists there. And they took a lot of the coral away and left it growing somewhere. Once we'd finished, they came along and put it all back around the restaurant, along with a plane they'd found, and yeah, so on and so forth. So I went to a lot of trouble to get it up and running quickly. So that gives you an idea. So that's coral reefs all around you, which you'll see shortly. Apart from that, you've got a channel that you've got to bring the ship in, and at high tide you can't see the reefs real well. So there was the planning of it was quite extensive. That's the Fairlane. Been on the ship before this job. Yeah, always, as I said earlier, a great ship. So the project forwarder fixes the vessel. That's standard practice. They do the planning and we review all that and work with them on it. We needed, I've mentioned earlier, we needed the cranes on the starboard side, the right side of the ship. Went to an on-deck stow. It was a dual lift, of course, to 400-ton cranes, so you had to do a dual lift. Orientation of the cargo on deck, the stairwell went aft, which is sensible. That's what we had to do. That's the big thing, the stairwell at the back. Lashing requirement, that was with the port captain mainly, that I went through that, and we increased some of the lashing on the cargo. The high lashings on the stairwells were put in place by Fitzroy in their engineering facility, and they gave us all the certificates so we could check all that and be satisfied. I didn't climb up and have a look at them. I trusted them. I zoomed in with my binoculars. And we went through it and discussed it all before even going to New Plymouth. So everything was planned. Everything was right to go. All the method statements, all the drawings were revised. Everyone was happy. And the latest was circulated for everyone to sign off on. The previous underwater restaurant. So Mike Murphy designed this one as well. Quite different. They tried to make it manufactured on the beach, on the island, different island. It's Crown. The Conrad Maldives, not Crown, Conrad. Well, there's only 175 tonnes, so it's a bit smaller. Dimensions are smaller, but they built it on the beach, and then they tried to sink. Then they had to sink it, but it didn't work. So ended up taking it all to Singapore and building it in Singapore. Put on a big crane barge in Singapore, which isn't far from the Maldives. Going over there, the big crane barge and lowering in the water. Problem was, to ballast it down, they had to get a whole heap of locals, and the locals are mainly from Sri Lanka because it's very close. So local Maldivians in Sri Lanka and India, mainland India. Well, they had them working in the hot sun, carrying sandbags, running up and filling it with sandbags to ballast it down. That's how they ballasted this thing down. So we'd come a long way with the new one. I wouldn't have liked to be involved in that one. It was quite challenging. Don't know who insured it, but good luck to them. But it actually got in place, and it's been in use for some time, since 2005. So of course, that's the Champlain's guys. They wanted to have bigger, better, more important movie stars there, those sorts of things. So they wanted to outdo their rivals. This is the 5 metre. 3 5-metre wide, 125mm thick glass arches. So that's how they built that one. At the time, it was the world's widest underwater structure, so it was quite unique. And it sits on 4 legs, 8 metres above the seabed. So it's a little bit different the way it's positioned. And this is the one where that he had a bit of a challenge. So that's how it sits there. You'll see it's when you see the new one, Valiar, it's quite different to this one. That's then put in the water with the crane barge. And they're about to ballast it down, I'm thinking. So I would have been supervising that. I'm sure I might have helped a little bit, carried one bag up. The fish eating the silicon was a problem. So Mike had been up to the Maldives quite a lot, and he had to come up with a new sealant, because the fish, for some reason, developed a taste for the silicon that was holding the windows in. So one day they had a diver down checking it, and they raised a bit of a problem. So Mike whipped up there and saw the problem and came up with some silicon. So he, again, learnt from all these lessons with the new one, so it was a lot better. So we shouldn't have that problem. So that's originally we're going to put it under deck, nice and simple, and then we decided and agreed to put it on deck, sitting between the 2 cranes. So it's fairly standard. That's the lashing plan, the latest lashing plan, and that's rigging up all the lashing gear, which took some time. The cranes are remotely controlled, so you just stand there with a little control panel hooked onto you and work the cranes with those ships. So it makes it easy. You can stand next to the chief officer and the operators and just talk to them about it. They're not up in the cranes, so it makes life a lot easier. And yeah, we had to put plywood sheets down. We had to come up with a way to share the weight across the hatch covers. We looked at the pontoon, weight distribution, all those sorts of things. But this sort of ship, it wasn't a problem. So it's easy. So that's putting down the plywood sheets and stoppers. big stoppers, and they were actually made in West Australia, which I thought was quite good because the ship called in to get some supplies in Broome, and that had an engineering company make those up. They were all NDT'd, and we had certificates. They were the main securing arrangement that stopped it falling off the ship. The rest were all for show. So we really could have sent it up there just with 4 f-stoppers and it would have got there fine. But because we like to have lots of wire lashings and different things, we put lots of wire lashings on there just to make sure it didn't come off the ship. But the calculations showed that was sufficient. That's all we needed, which is always interesting when you look at it. So that's where New Zealand is. Most of you should know that. Our brothers across the, cousins across the Tasman. So Port Taranaki or New Plymouth is there in that little bump, but the port actually faces southwest, which is where we're worried about the weather. 9th of February last year is when it was scheduled for. So I went over there and we had the pre-ops meetings. Vessel arrived day late, went out to anchor, which is fairly usual. The cargo went down to the wharf the previous night, sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning, I think it was, some ridiculous time of night. I didn't have to be there to see it, so I was grateful for that. Transcar used SPMTs, 49 SPMTs to move it down there, and it was only 8 kilometres. So that's the vessel coming in to port, and that's the vessel at port. So that's the opening to the port. It's a very nice port too, and the people are quite friendly, the natives. And that's alongside, so brought it alongside. And so when I got down early in the morning, that's what I saw. It was all ready to go. I just left instructions for them to ring me if they encountered a problem. Luckily, they didn't. Lots of people were interested. It was all over the social media, electronic media, and in the printed media. So it was quite the talk of the town. Yeah, and they wrote up some good stories about it. The media, nothing bad that I read anyway. I stayed away from it. They filmed the whole thing. I stayed out of the camera. I don't like being in front of the camera, but they had the guys that from Mike Murphy was on there quite a bit. They were interviewing him. They were also interviewing Fitzroy Engineering, talking to them, and there was another 2 surveyors there apart from me representing the forwarder and the stevedores. And we all just stayed out of all that, as we do. Okay. Oh, so here's the operations. So the Fairland has to put out a stability pontoon. So they had to do quite a bit of pre-lift work. So they did all that. Whilst they were doing all that, I went up to look at all the certificates, which is standard part of what we do. The captain was great, big German fella. And he had them all ready for me, big pile about this big. He said, right, John, here you go. All done. So I said, okay, I'll read those tonight. So all the certificates were done. Everything was checked off. He'd actually prepared everything for me. So then we could sit and have a cup of coffee and have a talk. So it was talk about the route planning. So it was very good. He's a great captain. So this is the lift, just to talk you through the lift. Again, yeah, it was a lot more difficult lifts I've been involved in. It was quite a straightforward lift, but still took time. And there was lots of people, media attention. And as I said to all the people before we started the lift, if anything goes wrong, everybody will know about it because there's media. So we don't need anything to go wrong. So we've done a lot of planning, a lot of talking before the ship came. When the ship came in, we had a big meeting with all the people involved. Talked it through. Yeah, I was confident there was going to be no dramas, and the chief officer and the captain were great. So I was happy with them because they're the key with the loading, as far as I'm concerned. So that's how long it took to load. Bit under an hour. Sorry, bit under 2 hours. Just a slow process. Departure of the vessel. These days, vessels don't like them sitting around in ports too long. So they're talking about having all the welding finished that night, NDT'd, and then out of there that night. The crew like to stay in port for the night. So they were talking about having it NDT'd in the morning, the welding finished that night, but they set sail the next morning. I wasn't perturbed either way. It didn't overly bother me as long as the NDT was done. So we had a number of discussions and arguments with GAC about getting NDT done because I refused to let the vessel sail unless they NDT the welds. And they refused to pay anyone to NDT the welds. We're talking $500 New Zealand, not a big cost. So they said I had to pay for it, and I said I couldn't pay for it because we're not in that position. So this went on for a little bit during the day and that night as they woke up in Europe. The other thing I wanted was welders from Fitzroy Engineering, because they're great welders. That's what they do, engineering company. We had one welder on the ship, good welder, but poor bugger. Geez, he worked all night. He worked till 1 o'clock in the morning, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning welding. Had a lot of welding to do. So all I wanted was for someone to pay for another welder or two to come and help him. And GAC had a lay cam of 3 days. They had time up their sleeve, so they wouldn't pay for any more welders. So it meant that one welder crew, who I spoke to a bit, and he did a good job, he had to do it all, which I thought was a bit rough, but that's business for you. So it turned out he welded till early hours of the morning, and I went home, got some sleep, came back. We did all the NDT, which the captain paid for, because the captain and I had a talk, and he said, "You're not going to let us go, are you?" I said, "Nope." He goes, "I think I'll just pay for it." I said, "Great." So he just paid for it out of his ship's funds. And he actually wanted it done as well, because that way we can all sleep at night. The welds are good. So we negotiated there, but there was a payback that I'll tell you about a bit later. The Husband cranes, in my opinion, they're fantastic, very accurate, a bit more expensive than other crane manufacturers, but great cranes. 16-metre reach. Okay, another interesting story is they had a tarpaulin over the stairwell. The first time I saw it in real life, I was looking at the tarpaulin, and I said to them, "Are you going to take it all the way up to the motor?" I was on deck like that. And they said, yeah, we've got it tarped. I said, "How important is it if water gets down inside this thing?" And I said, "Well, it'll be a disaster, because they've got, the way it was designed, they've got a lot of sand ballast. It's concrete floor, it's steel and concrete floor, and then they've got sand down as well, and that's movable ballast." And they said all the sand will get wet, and it'll cause us all sorts of grief in the Maldives. And I said, "Okay, well then you need to do something more than tarp, because the tarp will only last a couple of days and will be gone." So they said, "Oh, right." So they didn't know what to do. So I went and negotiated with the captain and the chief officer again, and managed to find one of their spare cargo nets that they used to rig under the gangway, one that was kind of a bit had it. So there was a bit of a deal done to get up with man lifts and put that over there and tie it or lash it all down, which kept the tarpaulin on really well. So we solved that problem. You think on your feet, and it got there without any water in it. So that's what we did there. We're putting the cargo net up over it. They're the F-type welders, F-type stoppers, sorry, being welded with our crew, and they were fully welded. Everything was fully welded. So no, no just bits of fillet weld or spot welding. It was all complete welded. And that's how it looked once it was on the ship. So there's all the wire lashings we put up fore and aft for the vessel, and the calculations showed that was way overkill. So I had no problem sleeping at night, even though they gave me daily updates of where the vessel was. So did the magnetic test reporting the next morning, come on with his little machine from Fitzroy Engineering. We checked all the welds, everyone was happy, got off the ship, and away she went. So so that just shows you the final lashing plan with the plywood sheets for the frictional forces, the F-stoppers either side, 14 by 10 metre, that's 10-ton SWL longitudinal lashings and 14 aft. So that's the sort of lashing we put on there. It wasn't going to move anywhere. So no claim coming, I'm pretty sure. So Nick, the way you get up to the Maldives, for those of you that don't know where the Maldives is, just up below Sri Lanka. Their original voyage plan was to go north, up between PNG and Australia, and I rejected that idea and said, "You're better off to go south," because we had a couple of cyclones early last year up there. And even though the weather wasn't the best down in Bass Strait, it was heaps better than going up where the cyclones were. So that was agreed. It was probably a shorter distance from anyway. And the captain said, that's fine. So he actually, the system they've got on board the ship now, you can actually look forward at the weather a week in advance, but we've got about 3 or 4 different systems where they can look at the weather. So we mapped out all the weather. It was about a bit of swell through Bass Strait, but wasn't anything to worry about. So we're happy with that. So we reviewed all that. Everyone agreed it. was agreed by head office, of course, by Jumbo and the port captain, who had the overriding say. He was looking after the ship. And they gave me updates every day on where the vessel was, position report and weather report. So I could look at that on the email every day. And it was cyclone season. So our island is, I've just got to spot it, South Mali. Oh, okay, that's Mali. So Mali's the main airport and everything that you fly into. And where we are is right up the north. So it doesn't, I think I show it on the next map a little bit better. So it was an atoll right above the north, right at the north of the whole Maldives set of islands. They're all only 0.5 metre above the sea level too, which I found quite incredible. So if the global warming happens, it's going to wipe out a lot of the Maldives, unfortunately, if it does raise the sea level. So that's the resort that was established, which is where they put me up. And that's a Havalio Island, which they're developing. So down here is where the underwater restaurant is going, and that jetty there. The other ones they built out there are the overwater bungalows. And then there were some other bungalows along that. That was the north side of the island. No, sorry, south side of the island, that side. And it's still a work site. So they were behind schedule, as you'd expect, and over budget. What's new? So that's and that's the resort. It's the biggest resort island in the Maldives as well, which was interesting. So we went over and had a look, talked to all the people. There was management to talk to, the operations team, dive team. We had underwater video links set up and communication. So we talked to the divers. Reporting lines were agreed. Who was in charge was all agreed. Ultimately, it was the captain who was in charge. The mooring teams, we had all these teams of people, and everyone, we spoke to them all, had meetings, talked through how it was all going to work 3 times. So we reviewed the mooring arrangements, the weather conditions, tides, currents, and so forth. So all that was done. All the equipment was checked. We had underwater pulley system as well to pull it into line underwater because of the currents. So we thought through that. So everything should have gone smoothly. Everyone was on standby, waiting for the vessel to turn up. Tugs by 2. We had 2 local tug masters. As English wasn't their first language, it was decided that I'd be a tug pilot, and so would Per Thornblom. He got the newer, more modern tug, and I got the old one. And that was for communications. So that was quite interesting as well. Haven't been a tug pilot before, so it was and they said the weather would be beautiful, John. Fantastic, but it wasn't. When we turned up, it was cloudy and the wind was blowing. So I said, well, I thought you guys had good weather up the Maldives. And they said, well, it's really unseasonal. We really didn't expect it. It's supposed to be beautiful. And it was very unseasonal according to everybody. So we didn't have good weather originally. It did get better. So the vessel arrives at anchors on the 1st, so it's a little bit late. So we had 30 knot winds, which is quite blowy, and we couldn't discharge in those winds. And we went out on board, and that was interesting as well because I'm used to getting on and off ships, but some of the people that came with us weren't. We nearly lost one overboard, just jumping off the vessel onto the rope ladder. And the pilot didn't want to hang around. He was from Mali, so he brought the ship up there, but he was going to take him to the wrong island. So he was only from Mali, so because the captain says, he pulls me aside and, you know, it's nice to see him again. He goes, I'm really worried about this pilot, John. He says, he tried to take me to this other island over there. And I had to pull him up and say, no, it's this one here on his charts. He goes, oh, right. So I said, is the pilot saying, you know, he's going to take the ship in? He goes, no, he wants to go back to Mali. I said, good, let him go. We don't need him. So we got rid of the pilot real quick. And he took off the next morning on a seaplane back to Mali. So shots flying in on the seaplane. Some of them were anyway, and some might have been from other people. So that's the state of affairs just from the air. So a bit like the Pacific Islands, it's not what we do here. No hard hats, no safety boots. People driving around in salt water with their machines, quite amazing. Unique to see, but on the ship, everybody had to have hard hat and safety boots and proper work gear. So they'd have gone and actually bought a a whole heap of work gear that had it there to give to everybody when they came on the ship, because it couldn't be jumbo workplace health and safety. They couldn't have anything else. So, see, it's not how they're used to working, but they do it. They get the job done. And interestingly enough, they were on a bonus system, so they had timelines to get stages done, milestones, and then the workers got paid bonuses to meet those milestones. So that's the system they used up there. That plane they found on another island, and so I went and had a look at it. It's an old ambulance plane, like a flying doctor plane they had up there, and it crashed a long time ago on one of the islands. So they knew about it, went and got it and picked it up, put it on a barge and brought it over. So when the coral was put back, they put that down in the prime position for everyone to be able to look at, and fishies swim in, and coral grows around it, and so I'm sure it looks very nice by now. So I thought of everything. That's in having a meeting, waiting for the ship to turn up. So that was one of the bars and restaurants that we had to frequent. So that's just going out to the ship. Doesn't look that rough, but it was a fair bit of swell with 30-knot winds, so it was a bit of a challenge. On the vessel, negotiating with the captain and the chief officer till into the evening. The captain wasn't that keen to do it the next morning. The weather showed it was going to be okay, so we wanted to go ahead with it, and the captain was a bit nervous. So we reran the operations of getting the ship in there, through the channel, a number of times, and the requirement was two requirements. One was the Per and myself had to be on the tugs for communication and looking after the tugs, which turned out to be a good thing. And use the tug masters for their local knowledge of the coral reefs and the currents, because they know how all that works. And the other condition the captain would go ahead is, he said, if there's anything I'm not happy with, I'm out of there straight away. No questions, no one's arguing with me, I'm going. So I said, okay, that's fine. If you don't like it, you go. So that was how we proceeded after talking it through quite a bit. Ship in. So being on the tug was interesting. They had a brand new radio, marine radio, on my tug. It was an old tug. When I jumped on the next morning, I met Hussein, Captain Hussein. We had a bit of a chat, and he gave me a cup of tea. And then I asked him where the safety equipment was, the life jackets, and he just laughed at me and walked off. So basically, just swim. If the tug goes down, you jump out and swim. It's clear water, and no sharks up there, so it's okay. But he was a good guy. He looked after me. They made some lunch and they invited me, and so on and so forth. But this radio, the captain was nervous about the whole operation, only because he's putting his ship right alongside a coral reef, which you'll see shortly. Fair enough, he's nervous. He's responsible for his ship, but also if anything went wrong, and this is what we think of being a warranty surveyor, it's going to be pretty disastrous. You've got coral reefs everywhere. If you put fuel out anywhere, it's going to be a bit of a problem. You're going to have to pay off lots of people, and you might have a vessel wrecked there that's really hard to move. So we didn't want to take any risk on it all. So we're quite happy for the captain to be cautious. I was very happy with that, actually. But we'd hitched up to the ship, and with the two tugs, I was at the aft and the bigger tug was at the forward, and we're bringing it in, and then the radio stopped working. So, because I was there for communication and making sure that we would have the tug around the right way and we're doing all the right things. So the radio stopped. So of course, I could imagine the captain getting very angry because he couldn't talk to me. And I'm thinking, oh, please don't go. So I got one of the crew who came over to ask what was wrong. And I said, the radio's died, we can't fix it. So I said, give us one of your spare radios, because I have the handheld radios on the vessel. So he put one down on a line so I could use the handheld radio. And the captain came on and he was very tense, but he was okay. So that was, and I said, what's wrong with this radio? It's brand new. They said, oh, we don't know. It's an old tug, so it doesn't matter. So vessel arrives on the 1st. It was held up at customs in Mali. No one quite knew why it had to go to Mali. We had the operational meeting, pre-ops meeting. Master was in control, ultimate control. These are all the things that we put in place. Early the next morning, without much sleep, off we go. And coming alongside into the mooring location went beautifully. The tides were right, the weather was good. As the tide came down, we went in on high tide. As the tide came down, you could see all the reefs pop up. But the tug captains knew exactly where the reefs and the currents were, so they said it's great, do it that morning, so we did. Put it into final positioning, and then it was all fast. So the operation went extremely well. So very happy about that. And then preparations for discharge the following morning. So here's just a few pictorials to show you bring the ship in. Not something you'd be used to seeing in that part of the world, or bringing this big ship in. And the weather was still cloudy, but the wind had died down, so it was okay. The wind came up in the afternoon a little bit, but the next morning when we did the discharge, it was great. Tug, and Per was on the bigger, newer tug from Ali, and they had a fish finder on there, and he said there was big tuna swimming around under the tug. So, because I went on his tug to have a look. So, yeah, fishing there's great. Unfortunately, I didn't have time. That's the platform where they build the walkway out to the restaurant. So you can see how close the coral reef is. Very, very close. So that's what everyone was nervous about, rubbing up against that. So that's how the operation went. It was only 5 metres. Phones everywhere, place. So you're on camera everywhere with people taking video footage of it and stills. That's just some photos from the guys that were on the ship on the bridge, Mike Murphy. That was his photos as he came in, so really good photos. So next morning, everything was ready, toolbox on board the ship, and then everything was rigged up, all the gear was rigged up. So it's just a matter of taking the weight after we checked it over and put it over the ship's rail. The hard part was not so much taking it off the ship, but we'd made an agreement once it was off the ship, it wasn't coming back on. No one wanted to put it back on the ship. So taking it off the ship was very easy, and putting it in the water, the hard part was underwater, and it was harder than what everyone imagined because of the current that came up. So the contact with the water was quite early, but you can see it took a long time before we released the weight. And that was just because of communication problems with the divers wanting to have a lunch break, you know, with the tide coming up. There was a lot of issues that made things quite tense. And then talk about putting it back on the vessel, which we just said, no, it can't come back on. And the hard part was positioning the legs into the pylons underwater. And that's what made it difficult. And that will show in the pictures that come up next. So that's just the lift, just the ship's rail into the water. That was a nerve-wracking bit for me, putting something in the water. First time I've done that. So just some more photos. The captain, I'd gone on the ship onto the bridge once it was moored, and the captain gave me a big bear, German fella, and he was very happy to see me. The ship was moored. And then he asked me for payback because he'd done me some favours. So he asked me, he said, how's the fishing here, John? I said, well, they tell me it's really good. I said, do you? He goes, I love tuna. I said, well, apparently there's tuna down there. He goes, everything goes well tomorrow. Can you do something about getting me some tuna? I said, I'll see what I can do. So I had a word to Lars and his second in command, Indian guy. And they said, no problem, John. We'll send some people out the next morning and we'll have him some nice fresh tuna. And that's what happened once we'd actually released the weight and we'd gone up to talk to the captain and he said, where's my fish? I said, so I made a call and up came the fish, big fresh tuna they'd caught that morning, and gave it to the captain. He was so happy. He said, that's worth everything. It was very good. So that was the payback. But it wasn't the guys, the local. And then on we go to have a look at the underwater restaurant. So this is the video to finish off with. So just to summarise, it was a unique project, unique location, a lot of time invested in the design construction, the critical risk associated with it. It was worth $10 million, so it was quite high value. From a surveyor's point of view, very important to understand your instructions and your scope of work, what you have to do. That's what we have to know. Understand the cargo, all the requirements and the timeline. Vessel selection, I've mentioned a few times, was important. Direct voyage, I thought was important, minimise the risk. Weather conditions, narrow channel, all those sorts of things, which we've spoken about. Meet, plan some more. Communicate, very important. Planning's just something you can't not do enough of. Of course, you need experienced marine surveyors. That goes without saying. And that's the goodbye photo before we jumped on the seaplane and got out of there. So thank you very much for your time. I've probably gone a little bit over, but yeah, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Or we can play another video.
Thank you for the presentation. Most enlightening, very interesting. I look forward to getting the discounts for the dinner there.
I'd like to.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next one. Cheers.
Hey. Thank you.
So just look at the time. And how are we doing it? Half an hour.